Why can I not move my money? Why do I have to only do it Monday to Friday? It used to take 6 business days.
Yeah, you
for the
could
money.
fly faster and be back home.
We're a next generation core banking platform.
Myles Bertrand, the CEO of Tuum.
We understand what banks need. We understand what they want. We understand a lot of the challenges. I remember when you started talking about a next gen core banking and you talked about putting it in the cloud. First of all, the banks would laugh at you. Second, the regulators would laugh at you. Fast forward to 10 years, regulators are comfortable. The expectations of the end customer is changing. The concept of me going into a bank branch is like the worst thing I could ever do.
I always believe that banks have this greatest asset, which is trust through fear.
One of the cultural issues that a lot of these well-established banks have is that our brand's too big, we're too big to fail, and it's just people culture that just can't connect the dot. This is how we've done it over here. We can get to the same outcome a better way. You just got to think differently.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's episode of Couchonomics with Arjun. Joining me all the way from Estonia is Myles Bertrand. Myles is the CEO of Tuum. I'm not going to give you anything more away because I think Myles will answer all these questions. But before we get into this, let me welcome Myles to the couch. Myles.
Thanks for having me, Arjun. It's pleasure to be here.
Thanks for taking out time. I know you're here for a completely different reason. And we had a short call with your team and they said, we could have Myles on the couch, and I said we'd love to have Myles on the couch.
Well, after a day standing on my feet at Seamless, I'm quite happy to be sitting on my backside on your couch, so it's great to be here.
Excellent. So this is not going to be therapy, it's going to be a conversation.
I saw there was no pillow, so...
So Myles, I guess the obvious question, at least for me, is you're Kiwi, right? You're running an Estonian fintech.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that?
You're probably the 9,000th person that's asked me that question, and I'm not really sure how I got there, but actually before I joined Tuum, I was actually living here in Dubai and doing something completely different, and you get a call and said, would you be interested in look at something? I said, sure, happy to talk to people, and they said, oh, but you need to fly to Estonia, and I don't think you necessarily put Estonia on your bucket list of the places that you want to go. But yeah, I found myself there. I think I've only found one other Australian/Kiwi in the whole town while I've been there for 2 years. So it seems to be pretty far away, but fantastic place. I really enjoy it in the summer months. For someone who's never lived anywhere cold before, and particularly for people here in GCC, your first experience of a real Nordic winter is a bit of a rude awakening.
I can imagine that. I can imagine. So Tuum, right? Tuum was called Modular Bank.
It was.
Right?
Yeah.
Walk us through the story. You also said you're an operator founder or operator CEO, sorry.
Yeah.
So how did this all come around? Give us a little bit of sort of back history on Tuum.
I think, so Tuum was founded about 6 years ago by 5 Estonians. And for those of you who know, Estonian has a very, very good reputation for fantastic technology comes out of the country. And, they did a lot of bootstrapping. They really invested a lot of time. The founders had previously successfully exited another company they'd had, which had been in the sort of the financial services space, more on the SI and consulting side. But they saw an opportunity, they saw this window where a lot of financial services capability and software moving to the cloud, SaaS, and they said, hey, we've been doing this for 18 years. We understand what banks need. We understand what they want. We understand a lot of the challenges. So they spent the time and took the opportunity to set up originally what was Modular Bank. And about 2 years ago, just 2 years ago, I joined as the operator CEO. So I have the pleasure of still working very, very closely with 4 of the founders. They're still inside the business on a day-to-day basis, which really gives me a great advantage that I've got sort of the founding team still there. We've still got the underlying DNA of the business, but then the opportunity for me to come in as an operator CEO with my experience of having been in this particular part of the industry for a number of years, knowing what we did well in the past and knowing what mistakes we made, put me in quite a unique position. So it's been very exciting. And they rebranded about 2.5 years ago. So, point Tuum is an Estonian word, which actually means heart, or at the core, or at the heart of things. And that's sort of where the brand came from.
And so that leads to the question, in simple terms, what does Tuum do?
Tuum. So the best way to describe is we're a next generation core banking platform. So, we're very much sort of position ourselves as an enabler, and that's for whether it be new digital banks, whether it be fintechs, whether it be even well-established financial institutions that are really looking to deliver digital-first, highly scalable, highly flexible banking products to their downstream customers. And so we work very, very much with quite a plethora of customers, actually, whether it be neos or startups, but we also have a couple of very large sort of tier 2 type organizations that are working with us. So it gives us quite a good feel for what's going on in the market.
Okay. So core banking or next-gen core banking or next-gen banking infrastructure, right, is been sort of the talk of the industry for about half a decade, if not longer, right? And there's a number of sort of next gen players with different sort of, if I may say, twists or spins in their story, which have sort of come up, right? Some have done better than others, right? I specifically, for the little I know and the little I see in terms of the industry, I still sort of see a massive resistance towards shift, right? Specifically with the incumbents, and I'm talking more about the incumbents rather than the neo digital banks or the fintechs who want to sort of be able to do more than one sort of trick or one sort of product, right? As you sit today, beyond just the fact that the customers are evolving and people want digital products and interfaces yesterday, what do you see as the big trends which is sort of forcing the CTOs, the CIOs, and the CEOs in these big banks to sort of take a step back and say, it's kind of time for us to start looking at what's next?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting how it's evolved for me being in the industry over sort of the past 10 years. And I remember when you started talking about a next-gen core banking and you talked about putting it in the cloud, first of all, the banks would laugh at you. Second, the regulators would laugh at you. And, that's just never going to happen. Like fast forward to 10 years, regulators are comfortable. Not every regulator, but a lot of countries now. And then you're even seeing quite resistant ones moving to say, hey, I'm more comfortable than I was. So that's certainly driving it. But I think what's really happening, and one of the key things we're seeing is that I wouldn't say it's a single thing, but I think it's probably 2 or 3 key things that are driving a different mindset in particular with the established banks. One, I think it's the end consumers. And we touched on a little bit of this in the car on the way over, is that end consumers are evolving. You now got 20-somethings, 30-somethings who just don't want the thought of filling out a piece of paper, the thought of going into a retail branch. They want to be able to do everything on their phone. They want it to be digital and they want it to be fast. So I think the expectations of the end customer is changing. and when we can talk about this, but I'm in this industry, the concept of me going into a bank branch is it's like the worst thing I could ever do. And I'm a massive advocate I use Revolut heavily because I'm a true global citizen. I travel so much, I have accounts all over the place. I think consumer expectations is driving a different behavior, probably more than it was 5 years ago. I think 5 years ago, yes, they were making noise, but the banks are sort of like, we're too big to fail. These upstarts like Revolut, these guys, I'm not worried. They're starting to have a big impact now. Second other thing I think that really is sort of driving this is actually AI. I truly believe personally that AI is actually going to drive a completely different behavior in financial services. Excuse me. And I think that's it's going to be around things like servicing, credit decisioning, how they support their customers. So you're still going to have a lot of the existing, but the expectation now is that's going to be really, really good. Now, AI is a real-time interactive thing happening. So you can't have a technology stack. You may have a really great UX or a great customer experience, but if you've got this core system that goes to sleep for 12 hours while it does its batch processing, that's just not going to fly anymore. So more and more CIOs and CTOs at established institutions are saying, hey, I need to get ready. I'm not saying you need to solve it today. I think in 2 or 3 years when AI really hits its straps, they need to have an always-on, real-time banking infrastructure. So I really think that's a key. So I wouldn't say it's one single thing, but all of a sudden, and I think we can see this from the type of conversations that we're having right now, is it's not like I need to rip and replace and do, pull out the heart and lungs of my institution. But what I need to do is I need to be ready and enabled with great technology, which means I can do things much faster than it previously would be. So I think it's definitely a real trend that we're seeing in the market right now.
Okay, let me try and break this down, and apologies if some of these questions sound a bit dumb and stupid. I'm pretty good at doing that. So let's take cloud, right?
Mm-hmm.
Next gen core or next gen infrastructure, very dependent on a bank being on cloud or not?
Very interesting. So in a previous life, we thought that was the only way. So you had to be on the cloud, otherwise there wasn't an option. One of the things we have explored at our business at Tuum is we don't believe it's quite there yet. And for the reasons that I talked about, like if you look at examples, the clouds are becoming more prevalent through the GCC as an example, but there's some countries where they just want it to stay. So we actually have the whole multi-pronged strategy where we'll always start with cloud, and in particular public cloud, but then we can also deploy on private cloud, and we can also deploy on-prem. So I don't think for us it's not really that's a red flag or a roadblock. We have that flexibility, but I think more and more the on-prem conversation is just going away. And I think you're seeing a lot of institutions really are making that commitment. They're saying, I want all my mission critical workloads in the cloud by 2030, as an example. So I think it's definitely there, but I don't think it's a mandated thing or a must-have. There's still a little bit of flex required.
Okay, and so one of the resistance to cloud, obviously, one is the availability of cloud infrastructure and having the choice, and I think every market is in a different level of maturity, right? But let's even assuming if the maturity and the choices did exist, right? You have issue with data privacy. You have an issue with data residency. You have an issue with cybersecurity, right? And these things are becoming, in my humble opinion, bigger topics than they were, sometimes driven by topics like, geopolitical forces, the multipolarization of the world, cyber attacks, which are coming cross-border, right? And for some reason or the other, public cloud is looked at, oh God, you're opening it up to, the entire world, right? So where do you, and again, this is an opinion rather than sort of asking for a conclusive answer, where do you think we're going to land? Are we going to land with lots and lots of banks on this sort of private cloud environment with a few of their capabilities sitting on the public cloud where the iterativeness and the nature of the function is that it requires constant updating? Mm-hmm. First part of the question. And the second is that a plethora of the fintechs that are coming in, right? And the banks are realizing that we should be using fintechs for core infrastructure, and we'll come to it, that you also work with a number of those players, right? Will they need to sort of transition their model away from being cloud native entirely and start talking about solutions which are implemented downstream, either on private cloud and prem?
Yeah. So first part of your question, I don't think it's a definitive box. You're in either right or left. I think it's going to be a hybrid. And I think it comes down to a number of factors. I think it comes down to the actual risk appetite of the organization themselves. I think we've talked about some regulators are much more advanced than others. So I think that's a requirement. And then I think it's around a capability perspective as well. I've seen, for example, where, there's perspectives and views. Like I think if you actually think about particularly the main cloud providers, they're very advanced from a security perspective. Their reliability is very, very good and gets better all the time. And you would argue, if you're trying to run all this capacity in-house, could you actually be as good and as modern as and effective? And I think that the jury's still out on that. I think that's an example. I think if you talk about data residency and data privacy is another really good, it really comes down to, I know some organizations where everything's in the cloud, but the PII stays on-prem or stays. So actually they just keep the personal information. So all the engines sitting even in another country in some scenarios, but the PII, the personal data, is staying localized. So I think it's not as crystal clear as it's A or B. It's actually A, B, C, or D, and there's a lot of factors that will continue to contribute to what that actual position is. I think I had a very interesting conversation not so long ago with a CTO of a very, very large global organization. And he actually said the first time I've heard one say, you hear them all talk about, I want to put everything in the cloud. It's the first time I've had someone say, actually, I'm thinking about bringing some stuff back on-prem. And it wasn't actually around, the factor was that was actually, because cloud's always supposed to be more cost effective. He was saying now it's for the first time it'll actually be more cost effective because the cost of hardware and servicing for him to actually run it on-prem than have it in the cloud. So I still think there's a lot of scenarios and the dust is still going to settle in regards to sort of where that ends up from that perspective.
So then my question is, if this is a hybrid model or a multi-hybrid model where, A, B, Z, and F, doesn't that introduce a certain level of architectural complexity, which then, if nothing else, will paralyze decision making? Right, because classically banks have dealt with too much complexity because we were talking about a bank which turned around and told me that they have 350 platforms. We don't want to get into why they got into that situation. I do not know the answer why they did. So they're already in this complex situation of 350 platforms.
Yep.
They've figured out a way to exist, right? Now we're going into this world which is possibly adding more complexity and deeper complexity because we're now talking about the infrastructure layer and so on and so forth, because 350 systems all on-prem, at least they're all on-prem. Now we're saying 350 systems or even 250 systems.
100 on-prem, 200 in the cloud, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the never-ending cycle that actually, how do you weigh that up? I mean, we haven't talked about it, and I don't want to, maybe you're going to bring it up later, but I think
please feel free
one of the biggest challenges these guys have is that at the end of the day, the compliance side. So most banks will tell you they spend 75 to 80% of their budget on staying compliant, because we're in such a highly regulated industry, et cetera, as well. So I think they always have that balance around how do they do that, because also when you think about, well, I want to stop being 350 systems on-prem and I want to sort of do that, that's a cost. That's a big project for you to think about that. Now, I don't see any more of these big bang, massive migration projects. They just don't happen. We've talked about it. They're career killers for certain individuals and certain organizations. So I think they also then have to balance, like, what's the cost? So what we're seeing more and more is these incremental bits where they'll go and do little things at a time. And what we have seen over the past decade, and I think you've seen it as well, is there's been huge investment on those peripheries. So huge investments on UX, regulators. So you've seen lots of investments on KYC and AML process, et cetera. So they're peeling the onion. And I think that's why there's a bit of a catalyst moment, particularly in my part of the world and the core part of the world, is that if they want to continue to have these incredibly advanced digital capabilities, they've got to look at what they do and how they deal with that from that perspective.
And they have to, right? And that's why I keep saying that you can keep tinkering with your engagement layer, but if you really want to achieve that sort of exponential change in terms of your engagement layer, you've got to get down to your orchestration and your core level, because at the end of the day, this is a connected universe in a lot of ways, and especially when you start seeing convergence in products, right? And that introduces a whole new level of complexity. And as you said, clients want that convergence, right? Because they want problems solved, not products bought.
Normally I have my phone next to me and I'll be waving thing and I go, this is the most important thing on the planet. I mean, I prefer to lose my wallet than lose my phone these days, because of basically I'm a digital, and that convergence is occurring is basically in the expectation of the consumers is so high. And so I think that is one of the true catalysts that's driving a lot of growth. The question is I think the newer players get it. Okay, and they know. So you see how quickly they're punching out new product and they're getting new things to happen. I think some of the more established players, they half get it, but they're not boots in all in yet in regards to what they want to do. And I think they still have that attitude of we're too big to fail. Gone are the days where, you're 9 years old, mum and dad take you to the bank for the first time, you get your passbook and you open your account, and then basically that's your account for the rest of your life. Like, those days are gone. Like, me personally, I know hundreds, thousands of people, basically, if they get a bad experience or something, they'll be down the road to the next bank in 2 minutes flat, because those that actually have a great onboarding digital experience, these guys can just get on their phone. They can KYC online. They can open an account. Like I did it here today. Like I got here and I went, oh, I don't have any dirhams. What I do, I just get on my Revolut app. I just created a new currency wallet and I moved some money from my euros over all in the space of 3 minutes. And then I'm here transacting in local currency, no paperwork, no nothing. So that whole, but try and oh, I want to open a foreign, try and do that with a more traditional bank. Like it's like pulling teeth.
Okay. so here's something very perverse I heard, and I'll obviously caveat it because it's hearsay more than anything which I've validated, right? And this is to do with a new bank being set up or a small bank which is migrating, right? Mm-hmm. Two stories, but I'm very keen to hear your views. In both scenarios, both these banks have actually gone for an upgraded version of what I call the monolithic players in the market, right? They had the choice to go with Tuum, with, I don't want to take other names, but, 10Xs, Mambos, and so on and so forth, but they've decided to go with two different players. But these are the, if I may say, the erstwhile incumbent core banking providers who have come up with their sort of next-gen versions, right? How much next-gen there is, I'm not going to talk about it. The story was very interesting. When I asked the first one turned around and said, we were confident that by doing this, from a regulatory perspective, it will be easier for us to get completely licensed, right? And I said, that sounds like a ludicrous statement. And they said, well, guess what? Our consulting firm said that, which I found quite ludicrous. And I said, I wish I could go tell them to the regulator that a consulting firm has ever turned around and said something like this, they get blacklisted, right? But maybe there is some level of truth there, and I do want to ask you from a regulatory perspective. The other one, which is more understandable, right, which is our board just wanted something that they knew about, and so therefore the name is recognizable. Yes, it's the Rolls-Royce. We don't need the Rolls-Royce, and we've signed that.
It never got fired for choosing IBM.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say that.
I'm allowed to say
You're
that.
allowed to say that. We have the same saying in my consulting industry too, right? Okay. Yeah. So how do you react to things like that? Because it can be very frustrating from your perspective. Maybe it isn't, but if I was in your shoes, I'd be incredibly frustrated.
It's very frustrating. I'll give you. So let's regulate a question. I'll answer that one first. I think it's getting better because obviously, if I think of our business, we've spent the last sort of 12 to 18 months really focusing on building out our brand. Like two and a half years ago, no one knew who we were. And now we're on the radar, so we're quite proud of that fact. And the likes of Salent rating us very, very highly, which is always good when we get those sort of accolades. I think, but if you look at us, we're very prevalent in Europe as an example, which is regulated under the EBA. We have fully licensed banks running and operating. So anyone who's in the EU, that first statement from the consulting firm, that really annoys me because it's that's just blatant. Okay. So I think you still have a little bit of that. And I think it's more, maybe if it was the first deployment in a country where we haven't integrated, that's fine. But I still think we should be given the opportunity because I think what the story we can tell to regulators, and we've done that quite often, is it's because even though we're not the regulated entity, our whole DNA and how we behave like we're the regulated entity, because we feel that they're outsourcing the crown jewels to us. We're the heart and lungs of what they're trying to do. So we behave like a regulated entity. So always happy to get in the room with a regulator because I think we can dot the I's and cross the T's on everything they need. To your second point, and I joke, but it's true. People ask me, like, what's the biggest thing holding you back? What's the biggest thing? And I always talk about its credibility. Okay, I'm a fintech with fantastic technology, which the industry will tell you that, but I'm from Estonia and I'm a 140 person organization. And sometimes, people just can't deal with that. And again, it's sort of to what I said before, we're not a periphery system. We're the heart and lungs. So you come up against that risk, people won't sign off. So quite often for us, it's always about, but it's that person who's prepared to put a little bit of skin in the game and sort of say, okay, I don't need to go through a ticker box schedule. It's actually, let's look at the capability, the functionality, the the track record that this organization has, talk to their existing customers. It shouldn't matter whether I've got, and you've listed out the brands, whether I'm an IBM, whether I'm all the other ones you want to rattle off. That shouldn't be the deciding factor, but unfortunately it still is. And I think that's, and I'm not even talking about, I would talk about all the next gen players now, even those that have been around for 12 years. We talked about, Mambu, we talk about Thought Machine. These guys are big organizations now with great, even then they still can't get across it. So, that's one of the biggest challenges. So part of how we mitigate that is to have incredibly strong partnerships. So, and we have this whole ecosystem approach. So we do work with very well players. We partner with the likes of some of the biggest brands in the financial service industry, because that's the best way for us to mitigate that problem. Yeah, but it does absolutely frustrate me beep.
Yep. I'm going to come back to the cultural context of this, because I think a lot of that decision making is the cultural context, and I think that's an interesting angle to take. But since you've talked about partnerships, let me talk about the way I see the competitive landscape and how there is a little bit of co-opetition. So collaboration between competitors going on, which actually is quite healthy in sort of my humble opinion. But let me come to it. So let me paint a picture in terms of what's actually happening in core infrastructure or core banking, right? So you have the traditional 5 or 6 or 8 players who've been there for 50 years or longer, right? Some of them have modernized, others have incredibly large SI capabilities, so they can build something on-prem and continue to weave something that becomes, in my view, paralyzing, right? It's a little bit like,
I call it vendor lock-in.
Yeah. They get into your bloodstream and there's just no way out of it, right? Yep. There's no way out of it, right? Then you kind of come into the next gen players, and let's call them, the first wave of the next gen and the second waves of the next gen. And I guess you're the second waves and there's the first wave of the next gen, but there's quite a few of them, yes. Right? You then have, we saw this phenomena a few years ago where we started seeing banking as a service, payment as a service players who realized that they themselves were too thin a player, and so therefore had to either partner up, get acquired, or actually evolve into becoming a core banking player. We know quite a few of them who went and acquired core banking platforms so that then you could acquire. And to add to that mix, and I had a very interesting conversation with a bank which has launched or spun out their own technology arm, right? And no names to be taken. Banks who
I can probably work out which one it is.
Well, yeah, there's a few of them out of the UK, and one of them is very, very successful. Who's been doing it for quite a few years, and the second one is more recent in its launch. But now they're entering the market because they're saying, "Hey, we're battle-hardened, digital native banks, and our core infrastructure is fit for purpose specifically for a certain type of bank, right?" How do you see all of this play out in the sense,
I think absolutely that scenario it's interesting actually. Just, I know, we've been at Seamless today, but I mean, you walk around Seamless and there's how many? 100 payment providers, 100 payments. I can't count how many people are in payments and everything else. Our space is still quite niche. You say there's lots of them, but actually you can only rattle off like there's 5 or 6 or 10. So I think and it's an incredibly big space, like it's huge. The way I think it's going to play out is there's actually roles for everybody in the ecosystems of what's going on. I think these guys that have built for an organization and then they've spun this off and said, "Hey, we want to do that." I would say yes, there's absolutely an opportunity for you in the market, but I'd also argue that you built your whole stack for a single customer. And now you're trying to basically take that, and because in most cases they spent way much more money than they expected to. Now they're trying to basically get some ROI on that, but a lot of it is quite modern, quite of it's quite good. But I would still argue that it wasn't built to be a platform that is scalable this way, to be multi-entity, multi-regulatory, multi-geography, etc. So I think there's a place for them. I think for the next gen players, there's great options out there. There's sort of the very out of the box, I do this and work with that. I think there's very highly customized, lots of capability, but that's a big project with lots of heavy lifting. And then I think there's players that are sort of say, I give you a lot out of the box. I'm highly flexible and adaptable. I'm truly modular. So you could take a bit of this and a bit of that. So I think you'll continue to see it sort of, there's quite those that actually it's a big space. So I think there's going to be lots going on. I think you talk about BaaS. I think, BaaS, and I talked about it at Seamless today, it's a buzz. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone wants to be in BaaS. BaaS is okay, great. A lot of those people that said, okay, I'm a BaaS provider, they didn't know, are they the technology provider or are they the licensee that wants to do it? And I think that's where there's going to be sort of some clear, I think you're either the tech and the infrastructure provider or you're the operator, the licensee, etc. And I think, we have a good story with that, which is LHV Bank. Like, not many people have heard of LHV, but they have about 200 plus regulated entities sitting under their umbrella, and they're processing almost 10% of the cross-border. They've got, Coinbase uses their capability, etc. And to us, we don't care. Like, they just keep adding entities. They don't have to spin up a new instance. They don't have to do anything. It's just sort of, I configure a new set of products, fees, interest calculations, etc. So I think that's where it's the delineation is really clear. Are you the tech stack or are you the BaaS provider?
So in this case, you are the BaaS provider. And
we're the tech stack.
You're the tech stack,
yeah.
and then they add all the other, whether it's compliance,
all the
regulation, the risk, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So not dissimilar to what Cross River is doing in the US.
Yes.
Right.
Similar. Yeah.
Okay. But okay. So if I take that analogy going forward, so you as Tuum are comfortable to go into a bank and say, something, you really don't want to touch your core banking for whatever reason it is, but you do need to now get into, the next level of services, which, to be honest, your core banking tech stack cannot afford. We'll come in, we'll go on-prem if we have to, we'll go private cloud, or we'll go public, depending on which part of the world it is and how sensitive the data and cybersecurity is, and we'll integrate with your core.
Yep. We say we do three things. The first thing we say we do is we solve a problem. Okay, so you have these guys, like established banks in particular, like that. Their whole system is not broken, but they have a problem. Like I have a problem with lending, even down to just consumer lending. I can't do what I need to do. So typically they'll look and say, well, can you help me solve that problem? The second thing that we look for is do something new. So they want to launch something new, but it's going to take 18 months or 2 years on our current tech stack. Okay, well, we could help you do that much faster in, 6 months as an example. And the third thing we do is we help people expand geographically. So rather than having to pick up, they want to start doing business in another country, etc., we help. That's sort of how we look at the world. We don't actually go in saying, hey, I'm going to replace your platform, because we just know that's fraught with danger. And that's actually what gets the conversation going in the wrong direction from a risk perspective internally within the institution. So that land and expand for us has been incredibly effective. And I think that's how you mitigate some of the risk decisions that we talked about before, is that, okay, I'm not having heart-lung surgery here. I'm actually having I'm doing a small procedure over here to see how I feel. And if that goes well, then I can look at starting doing lots of incremental things. And I think that's where the newer players are starting to have some success and tackle, and I sort of said this to you. So we look for use cases that make sense. And so when someone says, hey, I want to do BaaS, and we're seeing particularly in this market now, a lot of banks saying, hey, I want to be the BaaS provider for my country or my part of the market. But they have this rude awakening. They go, I can't do it on my tech because it's not set up to be, multi-entity, et cetera, with all the necessary separations of data. That's where someone like us can help. And I think that's where those are really good examples where the industry, and we talked a little bit about, that they talk a good game, but we're not really seeing a lot happening. That's where you can actually say, well, actually here you can do something that can be quite effective without the rest.
And you thank God you say that, because to be honest with you, even in this region, I'm sick of the amount of conversations we have on BaaS and embedded finance. But the reality is there is just such little movement from the traditional banks.
I come to Seamless. I'm here for 3 or 4 days. I get so excited.
Yeah.
then I'm depressed for the next 11 months.
Yeah,
and then I come back and go, oh, I'm so excited. There's so much talk, but then I get depressed again.
And I do think that needs to change. I'm gonna carry on with this, and then I've got a couple of questions. I've got so many questions. I wish we were able to keep to 45 minutes, but bear with me. We talk a lot about when we talk a lot about core infrastructure, and we talk about innovating in the infrastructure and so on and so forth. The conversation tends to be focused more on the retail side of the world, if I may use that word. And to a large extent, or to a certain extent, we're starting to see the SME world or the micro SME world also being wrapped into it. But if you look at banking, right, the big money, if I may use that term, institutional, wholesale, corporate, transaction banking, private banking, right. We're starting to see a little bit in the wealth space now that but that space that we spoke about, right? Why isn't there more conversations around leveraging technology to sort of really change the economics? I know the margins are better in that part of the business, arguably, and therefore there's more money to be made, and there's less of a burning platform to change technology. But that's not entirely true when I say that. So how are you, as someone who's in the industry, looking at this and saying, there's a lot of white space out there which one needs to go after?
Yeah, I think where we're at, and I think for a lot of the new players, we always look at the low hanging fruit, and that from a product perspective, and what you need to do, so retail and consumer is relatively simple. It's not incredibly complex. And then you can make that natural step to, small to medium business is fundamentally the same sort of thing. But I think then the moment you start going to institutional, corporate, the treasury side, and all the things that go with it, it gets more and more complex as you go. And I think that's sort of, as most organizations, it's interesting, though, that the amount of inbound questions we have is like, why aren't you looking at private? Why aren't you looking at corporate? So we have started doing that. But it's quite interesting how the step-up requirement and your flexibility and what you can do is needed for that. And I think most of the next-gen players have gone where it's been easy to get a foothold, establish yourself, build a brand, and do that. But I think the amount of corporate and institutional, they would say that they haven't felt any love from the new technology providers. And I think that's certainly an area where you started. So you've seen a little bit in wealth, some new vendors coming in that are focused very specifically on that component. Part of our long-term roadmap is very much that. So our idea is we want to be a universal banking core. And what I mean by that is retail, consumer, SME, corporate, institutional, and then we'll start to look at wealth and private. So we have this plan to scale horizontally, so that we then give our customers choice, because we pride ourselves on being truly modular. Each one of those is a modular component, so people can sort of tackle little bits with us.
And I think we need to do that because you go back 10, 15 years ago, we all kind of banged our heads and wanting to solve all the problems with consumer payments, but here was corporate payments or B2B payments, which was 15x the size, right? I forget, 5x, 15x. It was huge. And even today, if you look at, we went to Seamless.
Yeah.
I think 99% of the players out there are solving C2C payments, cross-border or domestic, right? And nobody's really looking at these large B2B payments. And with all due respect, whether it's SWIFT or corresponding banking networks and so on and so forth, that's carrying on. I'm very, very excited about everything which happens on the digital asset space, because I think that'll bring a new dimension. I think some challenges it'll introduce to, I guess.
I mean, the hot thing everyone keeps talking about, everyone's stablecoin. Like I've heard it like for the past the past 3 weeks. It's like the non-stop sort of.
Yeah, stablecoin's interesting, and there's great case studies, but I do think digital assets are a lot wider, and I think
And I think that's it, and I think and that's always our perspective is to be that universal layer where so all those digital assets and capability there. We don't want to go upstream. We don't want to go downstream. I'll go back to my analogy. We want to be this engine, and we just give our end customers the flexibility to do what we want to do. And I think what's going on in the industry really is, I'll say the pressure is building. It is more and more through, whether it be, we talked about consumers and AI before, but I think, let's be honest, a lot of businesses now are cross-border, and a lot of businesses are starting to get a bit grumpy and pissed off about, like, why can I not move my money Why do I have to only do it Monday to Friday? Why does it only happen this time of day?
And what does it happen at that cost?
Correct.
Agreed.
I mean, again, I talked about myself being a mad Revolut person. Like I used to get paid in Estonia and send money home to my family in Australia. And I used the traditional banking network. It used to take 6 business days.
Yeah, you could fly faster and be back home.
Now I get paid and paid into my Revolut. I set up a Revolut in Australia, get paid, and I've done all my banking in less than 8 minutes.
Yep.
And in multiple currencies and in lots of different geographies.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. This is a hypothesis. It is a little bit hypothetical, but it's looking. So there's a lot of conversations a lot of people are having around the impact AI is going to have on banking, right? And you can look at AI from 2 perspectives, right? One is you can look at AI that AI will be introduced into specific use cases, whether it's credit underwriting, KYC, fraud and risk, efficiency in the back office, chatbots, so on and so forth, right? But then there is this school of thought which says, no, AI is actually a foundational layer, right? And there's this concept of saying, like we've had digital native banks, right? You're going to have AI native banks, right? All right. And they're built on AI at every level of the banking infrastructure. Now, I'll come to the question in a second, and maybe there are 2 questions. On the digital native banks, the way the incumbents sort of reacted was a little bit like a lipstick on a pig in terms of in terms of the front end experience. So we'll put an app. I still have apps in this country where I am not being able to update my KYC. Okay. And this is a bank that I actually have a mortgage with. They're my salary account. And every time I open the app, it says, update your KYC document. I keep loading it up. Nothing ever happens. No. I got a call last week. Please come to the branch.
Ask you to fill out a form.
Right. I mean, no, they did ask me to fill out the form. It still doesn't work. I have to go to the bank, right? Yep. And then they digitized parts of their processes, and the incumbent said, we're ready to take on the digital native banks. And no way they were, but they get away. Because I always believe that banks have this greatest asset, which is trust through fear. Right. And that fear comes from the fact that, we're old. You don't want to put your deposits into a bank. I don't want to use any name. Right. So the big deposits stay with us. The big sort of wealth stays with us. And yes, you want to use it for transaction level, cross border, knock yourself out. We don't care which digital bank you use. You shift to this AI world, right? And you start talking about AI agents and customers having AI agents and so on and so forth. 2 questions. One, do you believe in this concept of an AI native bank, right? And secondly, even if you don't, if AI is a foundational layer, how do you introduce that in the context of the way we operate today?
So I think it's too early to tell if AI native bank is a real thing.
Okay.
Because I think conceptually, you could get there. But how long has it taken for the regulators to get comfortable on a bunch of stuff, which seems much more basic? And I would think it would take a long time for regulators to get comfortable with an institution which is AI front to back. That's my personal perspective. Will we never get there? Don't know. Could we get there? Maybe, but not in the short term. Okay. Second thing is exactly that, is that I think, I love the term lipstick on a pig. I use that all the time. And that's literally what I think a lot. Yep. So they put an AI capability, whether it be on your digital front end, like that's literally what. And I think that's one of the cultural issues that a lot of these well-established banks have, is that our brand's too big. We're too big to fail. We'll just put some stuff in there and seem on the front end we're being really innovative, but in the background, the hamster's still spinning the wheel to keep this thing running. So I think
hamster with some AI,
and that's a really good example. Like, I mean, the best example I had, the personal example was I was refinancing my mortgage back in Australia because my family still lives in Oz, and I said to the guy, like, I need to do this all digitally. Like, I can't, Okay, everything's good. You can DocuSign the documents, and it's all really good. It's great. He says, but I need you to sign this piece of paper. And he goes, you need to sign this piece of paper to say it's okay for you to do everything digitally. So they had to and it couldn't be faxed. It had to be an original wet, and it couldn't be wet X. So they had to courier a form to me on the other side of the world for me to sign, and you couldn't tell whether I signed it, and then had to go back and but that was, so they'd tried to have a fantastic digital experience, but really they would argue that actually the legislation in the country insisted that you still needed. So it's layer upon layer, and I think it's going to be really, really hard. I think it's also the other thing we talked about a little bit is that, and we probably haven't touched on enough, is maybe this starts that cultural conversation, because it's also the cultural perspective. Like, you can talk about doing something, but if you're culturally not ready to make that jump or do something different, humans won't do that. So they'll stick with what they know. And the number of times we've been in conversations and go through technology, and then the operations person comes, yeah, that's cool, but where do I sign? Or where everything's digital on screen? Yeah, but where do I store but where does the bit of paper go? And it's just people culture, they just can't connect the dots of, it's just because you do it over here this way and you're trying to replicate that over here on a great, fantastic tech stack, you're missing the point. It will never happen. You need to this is how we've done it over here. We can get to the same outcome a better way. You just got to think differently.
All right, so that brings me to
that is one of the biggest challenges that we come across.
And that brings me to the culture question, right?
Yeah.
So culture, is it a function of habit, lack of education, lack of awareness, or just being overwhelmed with the level of change? And I have to be fair on some of these CTOs and CIOs. They're being hit from every direction on every sort of need: regulatory, technological, consumer behavior, new competitors, journeys, and so on and so forth. So, and I guess the answer is culture is a function of all of that.
Yeah.
But how's it all going to change? Is it because we're just we're just going to have a new generation of leaders that will come in over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's kind of how the cultural shift is going to happen? Or where is there a silver bullet? If not, how are we going to achieve this shift in culture and behavior?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a silver bullet. So again, I'm trying to be I'm not trying to dance around the topic, but I think culture is one of the biggest hindrances that I see in the industry right now, because I will argue that the technology exists to create basically fantastic capability. We talked about before how those two banks, they basically just decided to an upgrade of what they already had. Highly likely that 50%, one of those two projects will not go very well, costs will blow out, etc. But they made the decision because it's probably better the devil they know, rather than having to change and think differently. So I think that definitely is part of the problem, the combination you have there. I think I really respect your point, and I think that's probably what people don't realize is that, you hear these memes about how between the year 1000 to 1000 BC AD to 2000 we achieved that much, and then in the past 25 years you've done that, and it's only getting faster and it's only accelerating. So I sympathize as well that I'll call it the paralysis of fear, is that because of the way some of these institutions operate. So a CEO actually makes a good decision, but then he goes through the bureaucracy of his own organization to actually get something done. And then 9 months later, when it finally gets approved and they get moving, the whole world's moved on, and there's something new and shiny, etc. So I think it's a hard life out there particularly for some of the people making these decisions. And so what I think they do is they go, it's easier for me just to put a Band-Aid on it, and then it's the next person's problem. And, that's I'll say that a lot, and I mean to say it in a really nice way. I don't think people are stupid. I don't think people are in. I just actually think sometimes it's just a little bit easier just to stick with what you've got and let it be the next person's problem.
And to be honest with you, we do this in every walk of, every function of our life. So it's a little bit unfair on that. Myles, last question. You're 150 people, right? Any fintech, any startup, you're not a startup, but you're still sort of under 10 years in operation. Prioritization is very critical in terms of, what you go after. What excites you or interests you about this region? Why are you even here at Seamless?
I think, it's, and I'm in this unique world where I've worked in Asia Pacific, I've worked in Europe, I've worked in the Nordics, I've worked in the Middle East. I've spent a huge amount of time in the US as well in various roles that I've had in my career. And I think I love the cultural nuances. I think people who think business is done the same way in every region around the world is just not. And so the nuances, what genuinely excites me is I think, some of the plans that actually are starting to occur, D33, what's happening in Saudi with what they're trying to do, double the population by two, like the organic growth and plus the immigration. What's genuinely happening? The plan that they want to really create this financial hub, become the fourth financial hub. That's super exciting. So I think the momentum that you see, particularly in this region, where if I look at, things are a bit more mature, a bit slower in the UK and Europe. Asia's quite exciting, where there's lots of things where they're really trying to sort of help the unbanked do as well. But I think there's grand plans here. And I think those always drive, which are really exciting. But I temper it with exactly what I said before. Fantastic plans, not to talk. I just hope soon it starts turning into sort of, quite tangible things. And you're starting to see it. I think there's some fantastic organizations that have popped up in UAE, in Saudi. We've had some fantastic conversations over the past sort of 3 or 4 months right across the GCC. And so, I don't want to temper it, but, we made the strategic decision 12 months ago to come here and make the investment and be here. And we're starting now to see that pay off for us with the conversations we're having. So, and I think, that's the thing. We're trying not to get pulled into Asia Pacific. We're trying not to get pulled into, so we've sort of said UK, Europe, and MENA is where we're really focused right now. And hence, I think we're sort of really doubling down on that.
Excellent. I wish you the very best. Now that we have met, I'm sure our paths will cross again. I've met a number of members of your team where I've been on the buy side, right? And I
don't think you bought anything yet. And we'll keep working on that.
Hey, I work for clients. They make the buy decisions. I only enable the process. But no, I've gotten to learn about the platform, which I think you guys are doing a brilliant job, right? And it's always great to see stories emerge out of small countries like Estonia. And I know Estonia does have a history of producing very good tech, but it's still actually quite it's quite a cool story, if I might say, of startups coming out of smaller countries and being able to compete at a global level. I wish you the very best. Enjoy your time at Seamless. I think you have one more day to go, and we will meet soon again. Really great. Enjoy the chat. Thanks so much. Thanks for coming on board. Pleasure. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Myles Bertrand, who's the CEO of Tuum, an Estonian startup, which is now obviously established in Europe and in the UK, but looking to expanding in the MEA region. With that, I'll say goodbye till next week. Bye-bye.